Good morning, church family. Would you please join me in the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Many blessings upon your day.
A Psalm for Thanksgiving, Psalm 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who makes us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, and courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations.
I mentioned last week that as part of the training, part of my education, we had to take, those of us who chose pastoral ministry, we had to take 3 courses at the hands of a wonderful professor in speech and communication. And ultimately, we were videotaped when we wrote our first sermon. And I have to say, it was the first time that I ever saw myself in a pulpit or saw myself preaching. And I have to say that last week I did listen to the video, wondering just what on earth you were going to be suffering through. And, I have to say, it wasn't all that rusty after all. But I tell you, I did go to the body shop again this week, and I got a little more rust off. So each week I will try to get all that rust off. The disadvantage that I have in this experience is that I really do miss looking at a congregation. Once you get over the fear and the fright of standing there all by yourself, of having to write something that you hope is inspiring, after a time I would look to those faces. And those faces were welcoming to me. Now I have Amy's face, and I have Kathy's face, and I have Annette's face. And they're going to have to be the 3 faces that I will certainly tune into as I speak, and I wish that it were all of you, but it's not. And because I'm not looking at all of you, I'm reminded of the young preacher who finishes school, his divinity, goes through all that training, and then finally is ordained. It's about a 4-year process, graduate level. And he's preaching his way his first week and his second week and his third week. And he is so bothered by the 4th week when he notices that Mr. Smith falls asleep about 2 minutes after he begins his sermon every week. And he just stopped, and he said, put his notes down and said, "Mrs. Smith, would you please wake up your husband?" She said, "Preacher, you put him to sleep, you wake him up." Now, I can't tell if any of you are going to go to sleep. I only have 3 people, and then they don't dare go to sleep because I will certainly wake them up. And I hope what I have to say is going to keep you awake for a short time. I recall that it wasn't that many years ago it was that many years ago I was in a pulpit. But it wasn't that many years ago that I delivered a sermon or a homily, as some like to call it. I was on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity. And we hosted an amazing group of people that were associated with Bike and Build. Look it up. It's an amazing, I don't know what they did this summer with having to socially distance, but there was this group. Bike and Build are these people You can see they literally bike all across the country, and they stop and help with building projects, mostly with Habitat for Humanity projects. And it was my task as the retired clergy on the board to deliver a homily. We gathered the Newcastle Commons, and one of the things that is a hallmark of the bike and builders is they put their front wheel in the Atlantic Ocean, and after biking across the country, they dip their rear wheel in the Pacific. And they did sometime later dip that wheel. This was the occasion of us being at the Newcastle Commons, delivering this homily, and they dipped their bikes in the front wheels, and off they went. I think they made it to Concord that day. The day wasn't long enough for them to bike the full day. These two men in that photo I met with, and we played golf when they came back from this journey. They survived it, and everyone survived it. No injuries. There were a couple of busted bikes, and one was stolen, which was interesting. They had some interesting stories to tell. But my homily that day, and I thought, was something that I will never forget. I said to them, think about this. We live 365 days in a year. Every 4, we live 366. And I said, as an exercise, take a calendar and sit down and try to recall how many days this month, the previous month, in this year. And I spoke to them, that was June of 2013. I said, now go back to 2012, sit with the calendar, and just try to recall how many days in that year. Go back a year, go back a year, go back a year. Some of us, we've got a lot of years to go back to. Some of you don't have that many years to go back to. But even if you don't have that many years, I challenge you with the exercise of taking a calendar and taking a notepad and just trying to recall the days you can remember. We're gathered in today in two groups. There are the goats and the sheep, and I hope that we're all sheep today. We're going to separate the sheep and the goats as the shepherd does. And what's interesting about the separation is that the separation occurs on the left and on the right. Now, among other things, I'm a word foodie because I've studied, with counting English, I've studied 7 languages. Years of Latin, in college, Spanish, French, and German, and in graduate school, Greek and Hebrew. So I am definitely a word foodie, and I like to play word games and have all kinds of little exercises I do. I get word a day. The word in Latin, let me bring you back now to my Latin. The word sinister in Latin means the left. The word dexter, it means right. These words have been transliterated right from the Latin, and so we have our word sinister. Well, sinister only means the left, but yet, biblically, the sheep are on the right, dexter, and the goats are on the left. So that's just a little something, another little trivia thing. If you want to know what sinister is and what dexterity is, it's simply a Latin transliteration of left and right. So it's another little, now you're up on the Talmud, now you're up on Latin. So we'll cover those two things. And when I think about my own experience and do the exercise of recounting days in my life, I think you will find that in your contemplation, the days of our lives generally fall in, the days that we remember fall in basically 2 categories. The days of great joy, celebration, remembrance, getting a new car, the birth of our children, the birth of our grandchildren. I think you will find that there are many days when your memories will be locked into days that were filled with great joy. The day you got that diamond ring, and then the day you wish you'd never put it on. The days that I can remember fall into basically those 2 categories. days of great celebration and joy, and great days of sobering awareness of what life gives all of us. The suddenness of death, illness. In 1958, I almost died of H1N1. I was so sick, the doctor was fearful that I would not survive. I couldn't lift my arm above the bed for a week. I was so weak. For a week. I recall the day, joyously the day, you can't see this, but maybe I'll get Debbie to put it in the newsletter. This is a photograph of me at about 7 or 8 years old, and I'm wearing a Davy Crockett hat. It was one of the happiest days of my life when my mother came home with that Davy Crockett hat. When I was young, I lived in two places. I was at the matinee every Saturday afternoon. I loved Westerns. And recently I went to a woman who's cut my hair for years. She's now renting a space from a shop, a woman in Portsmouth. And I'd never been in that shop before. And I'm in the shop, and I'm sitting in the chair, and I'm looking at all this paraphernalia. Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, the Cisco Kid. And I'm thinking, my mind was just going back and all of those wonderful Westerns. So if I wasn't in the woods with Davy Crockett, I was on a horse with the Cisco Kid or Gene Autry or somebody else. Those are the two worlds I lived in. And this is a wonderful reminder to me of that day my mother gave me this Davy Crockett hat. Day I will never forget. But then there was a day when I was 13 years old. A very painful day. I went to a Catholic boarding school, and we were all in the study hall every night. And once a week before the study hall, we had a mail call. And my mother faithfully wrote to me every week. And that day I opened the letter, and we'd get the letter, go back to our desk. I opened the letter. And the letter told me of the death of my 13-year-old best friend who died of leukemia. I just put my head on the desk, cried. My best friend died at 13 years old. Now, you think that was a day I could ever forget? No, that's a day I would never forget. It was a painful. Several years later, I was at another day, another really painful day. I stood at the dying bed of my mother, who was about to lose her 2-year battle with cancer. My mother had just turned 44 years old. I was 23, just recently graduated from university. My mother died. I watched her take her last breath that one day. And she left 5 of us children, motherless. It was difficult for all of us, but especially for my only sister, one and only sister, who was 16 years old. My 16-year-old sister lost her mother. How tragic. A day I will never forget. A day I sat in my office in California, and for the very first time, I would get the alum news from the University of New Hampshire. And I don't know what it was. It was in 1972. It's only 5 years after I graduated. And I turned to the back of it, which they always do, and there was the obituaries. I didn't expect to see anyone in that obituary. I was too young. Well, there I read of the death of Jeff Zader, my best friend at the university. He was like a brother to me. We've been separated. I was in the service. We were separated East Coast and West Coast for 5 years, but we fully expected to be in each other's company and embrace throughout our adult lives. We talked about it many times. In fact, we talked about the possibility of both of us going to divinity school because we both wanted to study religion. And now I read of his death. Apparently the story was that he and his partner for that day got into the car to warm up after a cold day of skiing. They sat in the car. The car obviously had an exhaust leak. They both died of asphyxiation. I called his mother. I sat there and just broken to think that to lose my friend and what his mother and the folks, what they had to go through. I would never see my friend Jeff Zader again. there are days in our lives for each of us, and I don't mean to go on in this with just the note of the pain, because I can sit here and tell you many wonderful stories, as I said, days of joy and happiness. And there's a day not long ago in the life of this church that some of you will never forget. It was a very painful meeting of this church, a special meeting of this church. And the vote, the church, you met in special meeting to vote for the resignation of your minister. That painful day resulted in a verdict, it was a verdict, I guess, in a way. 28-11, you voted to tender a resignation to your minister. That's a day you will never forget. You'll learn that the title of this sermon is called Kintsugi. And let me just read something to you. And by the way, I did get my glasses screwed back together again, although kind of, see, they work. Kintsugi, it comes from the kintsugi, the word kintsugi comes from the Japanese, and it means golden joinery or to patch with gold. The story goes that in the 15th century, a Japanese shogun dropped his favorite teacup, and it broke into several pieces. And he knew that the Chinese had a method of patching broken pottery. They dispatched it to China. It came back in typical Chinese fashion. They repaired it by using staples. I'm not sure just how that worked, but how the staples were applied. But he thought, no, this was not a way he wanted to see his favorite teacup. So he enlisted the help of a Japanese master, potter, who creatively came up with an epoxy and glued the pieces back together again. And where the epoxy was applied, he scattered some gold dust so that places that were broken appeared to be golden. And that's where the word kintsugi means golden joinery. I think I want you to see this piece. This is my piece of kintsugi. And that gave me this. Learning of all the places in my life that were broken. And knowing my dedication through my faith journey, through the help and counsel of many people, friends, I was able to put the pieces back together again. It's the invitation, it's a wonderful metaphor. It's the invitation of us as a church to live in community, to repair wherever there is brokenness in the community, within ourselves. Our mission is to do what Jesus said. Do it to the least of mine, and you've done it to me. My Old Testament professor would say, pray to God and tell the people. Let us go and heal ourselves. And lastly, Annette and I, bought a gift for our videographer. Amy is helping us put these pieces back together again. Without her help, we would not be putting these pieces back together again. This is Amy's piece of kintsugi.
Thank you.
Amen. Go in peace and be a light in the world.